There are habits you are proud of breaking, and then there are habits you don't even realize are breaking you. That is the dangerous part. Because the habits that destroy a life rarely arrive looking dangerous. They don't knock on your door and announce, "I'm here to ruin your future." They arrive quietly. 5 minutes of scrolling, one more excuse, one postponed decision, one conversation with the wrong person, one night staying up when you know you should sleep, one promise you make to yourself and quietly break, one day of doing nothing when you told yourself you would begin, and then another and another. Until one day you look at your life and wonder how you got so far away from the person you thought you would become. Let me ask you something. What if the life you are living today is not being determined by the big decisions you make occasionally, but by the tiny decisions you make every single day when nobody is watching? What if your future isn't being stolen from you all at once? What if you're giving it away 5 minutes at a time? Think about that, because most people are waiting for a dramatic moment to change their lives. They think there will be a morning when they wake up and suddenly become disciplined. A morning when fear disappears. A morning when confidence arrives. A morning when motivation becomes permanent. A morning when they finally feel ready. But life doesn't work that way. The person who becomes powerful is usually not the person who suddenly discovers extraordinary strength. It is the person who stops allowing ordinary weaknesses to repeat themselves. And there are 7 habits that can quietly keep you trapped. 7 patterns that can make you weaker while making you believe you're simply living normally. The frightening thing is that some of these habits will feel comfortable. Some will feel harmless. Some will even feel productive. And one of them may be something you have been defending for years. That's why I don't want you to listen to this speech as if I'm talking about somebody else. Don't think about your friend. Don't think about your brother. Don't think about the person who wastes time. Don't think about the person who makes excuses. Think about you. Because the easiest person in the world to lie to is yourself. You can explain almost anything to yourself. You can justify almost anything. You can say, "I'm tired." You can say, "I'll start tomorrow." You can say, "This is just a difficult season." You can say, "I deserve a break." And sometimes those things are true. But there is a difference between a legitimate rest and a lifestyle of escape. There is a difference between being tired and becoming comfortable with weakness. There is a difference between waiting for the right moment and being afraid to begin. And if you don't learn to recognize that difference, years can disappear. I once heard a story about a man who spent decades saying he was going to change his life. He wasn't a bad man. He wasn't lazy every minute of every day. He worked. He paid his bills. He took care of his responsibilities. From the outside, he looked ordinary. But inside, there was a dream he kept postponing. He wanted to build something of his own. Every year he told himself, when things settle down, when the children are older, when the finances improve, when work becomes easier, when I have more time, when I feel more confident. And every year, life gave him another reason to wait. Then one afternoon, he was cleaning an old drawer and found a notebook. Inside that notebook was a plan he had written 20 years earlier. Same dream, same ideas, same goals, different age. He sat there looking at those pages, and suddenly he realized something painful. The dream had not died. He had simply kept postponing the person who was supposed to pursue it. That is a different kind of tragedy, because sometimes the greatest loss isn't failure. Sometimes the greatest loss is discovering that you could have tried. And this brings us to the first habit, the habit of postponing your life. You may call it procrastination. But procrastination is often deeper than poor time management. Sometimes procrastination is fear wearing a calendar. You say, I'll do it tomorrow, because tomorrow feels emotionally safer than today. Today requires you to risk rejection. Today requires you to discover whether you're actually capable. Today requires effort. Tomorrow requires nothing. Tomorrow allows you to keep the fantasy of who you could become without confronting the reality of what you are willing to do. That's why procrastination can become addictive. It gives you temporary relief. You avoid the uncomfortable task, your anxiety drops, you feel better, and your brain learns something. Avoidance works not permanently, but immediately. And the human mind is extremely vulnerable to immediate rewards. That's why a person can know exactly what they should do and still do the opposite. They know they should study. They scroll. They know they should exercise. They lie down. They know they should build the business. They watch another video. They know they should make the call. They wait. And every time they choose immediate comfort, they train themselves to become the kind of person who escapes discomfort. That is why the battle is bigger than the task. You're not simply deciding whether to work for an hour. You're deciding who you are becoming. Every action is a vote. Every delay is a vote. Every excuse is a vote. Every disciplined decision is a vote. You are voting for an identity. And eventually, the votes become your character. Think about a person who says, "I'm not disciplined." Maybe that person has repeated the statement so many times that they no longer question it. But discipline is not a personality trait handed to a lucky few. Discipline is repeatedly doing what matters when you don't feel like doing it. The first time is difficult. The 100th time is different. Not because the task magically became easier, but because you became different. You trained yourself. And that is the secret most people miss. You don't wait to become disciplined before you act. You act, and through action you become disciplined. You don't wait to become confident before you begin. You begin, survive discomfort, learn, improve, and confidence begins to grow. You don't wait to become fearless. You move while fear is still there. That's how strength is built. But procrastination doesn't just steal hours. It steals evidence that you can trust yourself. And self-trust is one of the most valuable forms of confidence a person can possess. When you repeatedly promise yourself something and fail to follow through, eventually your own mind stops believing you. You say, "Tomorrow I'll start." And somewhere inside, another voice says, "You've said that before." You say, "This time will be different." And the voice remembers. That's why broken promises to yourself are more expensive than they appear. Nobody else may know. Nobody else may punish you. But your subconscious keeps score. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen self-respect. Every time you break one unnecessarily, you weaken it. And this is why the smallest disciplined action can become powerful. Get up when you said you would. Finish what you started. Put the phone down. Do the difficult hour. Make the uncomfortable call. Drop the first page. Walk into the gym. Open the book. Take the first step. Not because that one action will transform everything overnight, but because you're teaching yourself, "I can trust me." And once you begin trusting yourself, something changes. You stop needing constant motivation. You stop needing someone to push you. You stop negotiating with every uncomfortable task. You become quieter, stronger, more reliable. And then another habit becomes visible. The habit of constantly consuming instead of creating. Look around. We live in a world where you can spend your entire day watching other people live. Other people exercising. Other people traveling. Other people becoming wealthy. Other people building companies. Other people learning. Other people speaking. Other people creating. And you can spend 6 hours consuming evidence that everybody else is moving while you remain still. There is nothing inherently wrong with entertainment. There is nothing wrong with rest. There is nothing wrong with enjoying content. The problem begins when consumption becomes your default state, when your mind is always receiving and rarely producing. When you know hundreds of opinions but cannot hear your own. When you watch productivity videos instead of doing productive work. When you save books you never read, save workouts you never perform. Save business ideas you never execute. Save motivational speeches that make you feel powerful for 20 minutes and then return to the same behavior. Information can become another form of procrastination. You can learn so much that you become afraid to act because learning feels safe. Execution is exposed. When you consume, nobody can judge your unfinished work. When you create, somebody can reject it. That's why creation requires courage. You have to put something into the world that can be criticized. Your first video may be terrible. Your first business idea may fail. Your first speech may be awkward. Your first attempt may produce almost nothing. But that's where growth happens, not in imagining. In contact with reality, reality gives you feedback. Feedback makes you better. And improvement creates confidence. But there is another habit hiding underneath excessive consumption. Comparison. You see somebody else's finished chapter while you're living through your rough draft. You see the car, not the years of sacrifice. You see the house, not the failures. You see the body, not the mornings they didn't want to train. You see the success, not the private moments when they question themselves. And then you compare your behind the scenes to somebody else's highlight reel. That is an unfair battle. You cannot build a peaceful life while constantly measuring your worth against other people's visible results. Comparison turns another person's success into evidence against yourself. But it shouldn't. Their success is not your failure. Their timeline is not your timeline. Their opportunity is not your opportunity. And perhaps most importantly, their identity is not your identity. Your competition is with the person you keep becoming. Ask yourself, am I stronger than I was? Am I wiser, more disciplined, more patient, more courageous, more responsible, more capable? Because there is a version of you that existed 5 years ago who would be amazed by some of what you now understand. Don't ignore that progress. But don't use progress as an excuse to stop growing either. There is a strange balance between self-acceptance and self-improvement. You must be able to say, I accept where I am, and at the same time, I refuse to remain here. That is maturity. You don't hate yourself into becoming better. You respect yourself enough to demand better from yourself. And that brings us to another dangerous habit, negative self-talk. The things you repeatedly say to yourself become instructions. I can't. I'm unlucky. I'm not smart enough. People like me don't succeed. I'm too late. I always fail. I have no discipline. I'll never change. Be careful. A thought repeated often enough can become a belief. A belief repeated long enough can become an identity. And identity influences behavior. If you believe you're incapable, you'll unconsciously search for evidence. You will avoid challenges. You will interpret setbacks as confirmation. You will stop trying earlier. Then your lack of results will appear to prove your original belief. That is how a mental prison is built. Not with walled prison is built, with conclusions. But there is something deeper. You don't have to believe every thought you have. Your mind produces thoughts. That doesn't mean every thought deserves authority. A thought can enter your mind without becoming your command. You can notice fear without obeying fear. You can notice doubt without surrendering to doubt. You can notice the thought, I can't do this, and answer, maybe I can't do it yet, but I'm willing to learn. That small word changes everything. Yet, I can't do it yet. I don't understand it yet. I'm not good at it yet. I'm not where I want to be yet. Yet creates psychological space between your current identity and your potential. And potential matters because your current condition is not necessarily your final condition. But there is another habit that can quietly destroy that potential. The habit of keeping company with people who normalize the life you are trying to escape. You don't have to hate anyone. You don't have to become arrogant. You don't have to announce that you're changing. But you must understand something. Environment is powerful. If everyone around you makes excuses, excuses become normal. If everyone complains, complaining becomes normal. If everyone wastes time, wasting time feels normal. If everyone mocks ambition, ambition begins to feel embarrassing. And if everyone is committed to growth, growth becomes normal too. People influence standards. You may think you're choosing your behavior independently, but humans are social creatures. We adapt, we imitate, we seek belonging. And sometimes we sacrifice our future because we are afraid of becoming different from our friends. Think about that. How many dreams have been abandoned because somebody laughed? How many businesses were never started because someone said, that won't work? How many people stopped exercising because their friends called them obsessed? How many people lowered their standards because they didn't want to make others uncomfortable? You can love people without copying their habits. You can care about people without following them into mediocrity. And sometimes growth requires distance. Not anger, distance. There is a difference. You don't need to fight everybody who isn't going where you're going. You simply need to stop allowing every voice to become your inner voice. Because if you listen to enough negativity long enough, eventually it sounds like your own thinking. And that leads to another habit. The habit of complaining without taking responsibility. Life is not always fair. Let's be honest. Some people start with advantages you didn't have. Some people face circumstances you didn't choose. Some people are betrayed. Some people lose opportunities. Some people experience painful seasons. There are things that happen to you that are not your fault. But there comes a point when you must ask a different question. What am I going to do now? Responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything. Responsibility means recognizing your power over what happens next. You may not control what happened. You may not control what somebody said. You may not control the opportunity you lost. But you have influence over your next decision. And your next decision matters. A person can spend 10 years explaining why their life didn't work, or they can spend the next 10 years building something. The past can explain you. It does not have to imprison you. There was a woman who lost almost everything after trusting the wrong business partner. For months, she told everyone the same story. How she was betrayed. How unfair it was. How she didn't deserve it. And she was right. She didn't deserve it. But being right wasn't rebuilding her life. One day, someone asked her a question she didn't want to hear. If you keep telling this story for another 5 years, what will your life look like? She became silent because the question changed the timeline. She had been thinking about yesterday. The question forced her to think about 5 years from now. She realized that responsibility wasn't saying the betrayal was acceptable. Responsibility was refusing to let the betrayal become the rest of her life. She started again, small, very small. She learned, worked, failed, learned again, and eventually built something new. Not because the pain disappeared, but because she stopped making pain the architect of her future. That's what resilience really is. Not pretending you weren't hurt. Not pretending everything is fine. Resilience is saying, this happened. It affected me. It hurt me. But it does not get unlimited authority over what happens next. And maybe you need to hear that. Because there is a difference between honoring your pain and worshiping your pain. Some people become attached to their own story of suffering. It becomes their identity. They don't know who they are without the problem, but you are more than what happened to you. You are also what you choose after what happened to you. And now I want you to imagine something. Imagine that today is not the day your life changes. Imagine you continue exactly as you are. Same sleep schedule, same distractions, same people, same excuses, same emotional reactions, same spending. Same procrastination, same avoidance, same negative thoughts. Nothing dramatic happens. That's the point. Nothing dramatic. The years simply pass. 1 year, then 3, then 5. Where are you? What does your body feel like? What does your bank account look like? What skills have you developed? What relationships have you damaged? What dreams are still sitting inside that notebook? What opportunities will no longer be available because you waited? And now reverse it. Imagine 5 years of disciplined small decisions. Not perfection. Consistency. 5 years of learning. 5 years of protecting your attention. 5 years of becoming more financially responsible. 5 years of training your body. 5 years of reading. 5 years of building a skill. 5 years of choosing better people. 5 years of keeping promises to yourself. You don't need to become extraordinary tomorrow. You need to understand what ordinary decisions become when repeated for years. That is the compound effect. People want dramatic results, but extraordinary lives are often built through undramatic days. A person becomes financially secure through thousands of small decisions. A person becomes physically strong through thousands of repetitions. A person becomes knowledgeable through thousands of pages. A person becomes trustworthy through thousands of kept promises. And a person becomes weak the same way. Small compromises, repeated small excuses, repeated small distractions, repeated small lies, repeated small acts of cowardice, repeated. Eventually, the small thing isn't small anymore. It has become you. That's why you must be careful about what you practice, because you are always practicing something, even when you think you're doing nothing. You're practicing attention, you're practicing avoidance, you're practicing patience, you're practicing impatience, you're practicing courage, you're practicing fear, you're practicing discipline, you're practicing escape. The question is not whether you are being trained. The question is, who is training you? Your environment, your phone, your fears, your habits, or you? And this leads into one of the most destructive habits of all. Constant distraction. Your attention is your life. Ride that again mentally. Your attention is your life. Where your attention goes, your life goes. If you give your best attention to meaningless things, don't be surprised when meaningful things receive whatever energy remains. You cannot build a meaningful life with leftover attention. Yet many people wake up and immediately surrender their minds. Notifications, moss, videos, argument, news, opinions, other people's priorities before they've even asked themselves what matters today. And then they spend the day reacting. At night they feel exhausted, but they cannot explain what they accomplished. They were busy, but busy is not the same as effective. Noise is not progress. Movement is not direction. You can run all day and still be running in circles. One of the most powerful things you can do is decide what deserves your attention before the world decides for you. You don't need a perfect morning routine. You need intention. Now what matters? Protect it, because attention is finite. You can spend it on everything, or you can spend it on what matters. And when you begin protecting attention, something surprising happens. Your mind becomes quieter. You start thinking again. You notice ideas. You notice emotions. You notice patterns. You notice how often you reach for your phone when you're uncomfortable. And that's important, because distraction isn't always about entertainment. Sometimes distraction is emotional avoidance. You scroll because you're lonely. You work constantly because you don't want to think. You stay busy because silence makes you confront yourself. You consume because creation feels risky. You joke because vulnerability scares you. You sleep because tomorrow requires a decision. Sometimes the habit is not the real problem. The habit is the medicine you're using to avoid the real problem. And if you only remove the habit, without understanding the pain underneath it, you'll replace it with another habit. That's why self-awareness matters. Ask, what am I trying not to feel? What am I avoiding? What becomes uncomfortable when the noise stops? Those questions can lead you somewhere deeper. Maybe you're not lazy. Maybe you're afraid you'll fail. Maybe you're not unmotivated. Maybe you've lost connection with a meaningful goal. Maybe you don't need more information. Maybe you need courage. Maybe you don't need another productivity system. Maybe you need to keep one promise to yourself. That's the kind of honesty that changes people. Not motivational slogans. Honesty. And then comes another habit that people rarely recognize, living for short-term pleasure at the expense of long-term freedom. The world is designed to make immediate pleasure incredibly easy. You can buy something instantly, eat something instantly, watch something instantly, get entertainment instantly, get stimulation instantly. You can avoid almost every uncomfortable feeling instantly. But freedom usually works differently. Freedom is delayed. You sacrifice today, so tomorrow has more options. You save instead of spending everything. You study instead of entertaining yourself every evening. You train instead of staying comfortable. You practice instead of pretending. You say no instead of needing approval. You work when nobody applauds. This is why discipline can feel painful in the beginning. You are exchanging immediate comfort for future freedom. And the future doesn't send you a receipt. You don't immediately feel rewarded. That's why many people quit. They plant seeds and dig them up every week to see if they're growing. They start saving, then spend, start exercising, then stop, start learning, then abandon it. Start building, then switch direction. They never stay long enough for compounding to reveal itself. Patience is not passive. Patience is sustained effort without immediate evidence. That's powerful and difficult. But consider the alternative. What is the price of never learning patience? You become addicted to novelty. Every new idea excites you. Every new goal feels perfect. Then the boring middle arrives, and you leave. The boring middle is where most people disappear. The beginning is exciting. The result is exciting. But the middle? The middle is repetition. No applause. No dramatic transformation. Just another workout, another page, another client, another application, another practice session, another early morning, another uncomfortable conversation. And if you can learn to respect the middle, you become dangerous in the best possible sense because you become consistent. You stop needing everything to feel exciting. You understand that mastery is often boring from the outside. The pianist practicing scales doesn't look heroic. The entrepreneur reviewing numbers at midnight doesn't look inspirational. The student reading the same concept again doesn't look extraordinary. The person refusing another unnecessary purchase doesn't look powerful. But those invisible decisions create visible lives. And perhaps the deepest habit you must avoid is this: betraying your own standards. Because once you start negotiating with your standards begin to move. You say, just this once. Then once becomes twice. You say, nobody will know, but you know. You say, it doesn't matter, but it matters because you're becoming somebody. Self-respect is built in private, not on stages, not in photographs, not when people are watching private choices. That's where character is formed. Who are you when nobody is impressed? Who are you when nobody will reward you? Who are you when quitting would be easier? That person is closer to your real character than the version of you that performs for an audience. And I want you to understand something about self-respect. Self-respect isn't thinking you're better than other people. It is knowing you will not repeatedly abandon yourself. You will not keep making promises you have no intention of keeping. You will not continually expose your mind to things that destroy your peace. You will not continue relationships that repeatedly violate your boundaries simply because you're afraid to be alone. You will not continue spending tomorrow's money to impress today's audience. You will not continue choosing temporary comfort while telling yourself you want permanent freedom. At some point, your life requires a decision, not a dramatic speech, a decision. And decisions are powerful because they close doors. You cannot become someone new while keeping every door open to the old you. There comes a moment when you have to say, that version of me had reasons, but those reasons no longer get to control me. You can forgive your past self. You can understand why you behaved the way you did. You can recognize that you were doing the best you knew how, but you can still decide to become better. Compassion without accountability becomes stagnation. Accountability without compassion becomes self-hatred. You need both. You need to look at yourself honestly without destroying yourself for being imperfect, because you will fail. You will have bad days. You will lose focus. You will procrastinate sometimes. You will make mistakes. You will fall back into old patterns. The question isn't whether you ever fall. The question is how long you stay down. A strong person is not someone who never loses. A strong person learns how to return to discipline, return to purpose, return to honesty, return to the work, return to the standard. Return to themselves. And now imagine the person you could become if you stopped expecting yourself to be perfect and started expecting yourself to return. You miss one workout, return. You waste a day. Return. You make a bad financial decision, return. You lose your temper, return. You fail, return. You don't need a perfect record. You need a pattern of returning. That is resilience. But there is another danger. Using your past mistakes as proof that you cannot change. Your past is evidence of what happened. It is not a prophecy. If you made terrible decisions 5 years ago, that doesn't mean you are permanently terrible at making decisions. If you wasted years, you cannot recover those years. But you can refuse to waste the next ones. And sometimes the most powerful motivation isn't thinking about what you can gain. It's realizing what you can no longer afford to lose. You can no longer afford another year of the same excuses. Another year of saying, someday. Another year of shrinking. Another year of waiting for confidence. Another year of letting other people's opinions determine your choices. Another year of being distracted from your own life. Another year of knowing what you should do and refusing to do it. Time doesn't negotiate. You can negotiate with a person. You can renegotiate a contract. You can change a plan. You cannot renegotiate yesterday. Yesterday is gone, and tomorrow is not guaranteed. All you ever truly possess is this moment and the decisions available inside it. That doesn't mean you need to become obsessed with productivity. It means you should become conscious of your choices. There is a difference. A meaningful life is not a life where every minute is productive. It is a life where the important things are not continually sacrificed for the trivial. Rest matters. Family matters. Joy matters. Friendship matters. Silence matters. But avoidance disguised as rest is different. Pleasure disguised as happiness is different. Buzziness disguised as progress is different. And learning to tell the difference is part of growing up. At some point, you stop asking, what do I feel like doing? And you begin asking, what does the person I want to become need me to do? That question changes behavior, because feelings are information. They are not always instructions. You can feel tired and still do something important. You can feel afraid and still speak. You can feel uncertain and still begin. You can feel discouraged and still continue. Courage isn't the absence of emotion. Courage is choosing according to your values, while emotion is present. And that is why the person who learns emotional discipline becomes powerful, not emotionally numb, emotionally governed. They can feel anger without becoming anger. Feel fear without becoming fear. Feel sadness without abandoning responsibility. Feel excitement without making reckless decisions. Feel disappointment without declaring themselves a failure. That is maturity, and it is built through practice. Again and again. Small decisions daily. Quickly. Until one day you realize you don't react the way you used to. The trigger is still there, but you are different. The temptation is still there, but you are different. The fear is still there, but you are different. The opportunity to quit is still there, but you are different. That's transformation, not becoming a completely different human being overnight. Becoming a person who responds differently. And now I want you to imagine meeting yourself 5 years from today. Not the fantasy version, the real version, the version created by your current habits. What does that person say to you? If you continue delaying, perhaps they look at you with disappointment, not because you were incapable, but because you knew what needed to change. You knew which habits were hurting you. You knew which conversations were draining you. You knew which distractions were consuming your attention. You knew which opportunities you were avoiding. You knew. And knowing without acting has a cost. But imagine another version. You meet yourself 5 years from now after thousands of disciplined choices. That person doesn't look perfect, but there is something different in their eyes. Confidence. Not arrogance, evidence. They have evidence that they can trust themselves. They remember the mornings they didn't want to get up, the nights they wanted to quit, the failures, the rejection, the months when nothing seemed to work, but they kept returning. They built skills. They became financially wiser. They became healthier. They learned. They became selective about their environment. They stopped begging for approval. They became comfortable being misunderstood. And when they look at you, perhaps the message isn't, you became lucky. Maybe it's, you finally stopped getting in your own way. That is a powerful thought, because sometimes the enemy is not outside. Sometimes you are carrying the lock and asking where the prison is. Your excuses are the lock. Your distractions are the lock. Your fear of judgment is the lock. Your attachment to comfort is the lock. Your negative identity is the lock. Your refusal to take responsibility is the lock. And the key is not hidden. It's in your next decision. Not your next 100 decisions. Your next one. What will you do when this speech ends? Not for applause. Not for a dramatic transformation. What is the next honest decision? Maybe it is going to bed on time. Maybe it is deleting the distraction. Maybe it is opening the document. Maybe it is making the call. Maybe it is apologizing. Maybe it is setting a boundary. Maybe it is looking at your finances honestly. Maybe it is admitting that the relationship is unhealthy. Maybe it is finally accepting that nobody is coming to live your life for you. That last realization can hurt, but it can also free you. Because when you stop waiting for someone to rescue you, you begin discovering your own agency. You stop saying, someone should help me, and start asking, what can I do? You stop asking, why isn't life fair? And start asking, what can I build from here? You stop asking, when will I feel ready? And start asking, what can I learn by beginning? Those questions don't erase difficulty. They change your relationship with difficulty. And that is where strength begins. Not when life becomes easy. When you become capable of carrying difficulty without surrendering your identity. There will always be another obstacle, another bill, another rejection, another difficult conversation, another season where your progress feels invisible. If your entire strategy depends on feeling motivated, you are vulnerable. But if your strategy depends on values, discipline, and identity, you become steadier. You don't need to feel inspired to keep your word. You don't need to feel excited to do what matters. You don't need perfect confidence to take the next step. Sometimes you simply need to remember who you are trying to become. And then there are moments when you must choose between two kinds of pain. The pain of discipline, or the pain of regret. The pain of saying no today, or the pain of wishing you had said no 5 years ago. The pain of starting as a beginner, or the pain of never discovering what you could have become. The pain of leaving a destructive environment, or the pain of staying until your identity is shaped by it. The pain of saving, or the pain of financial dependence, the pain of learning, or the pain of remaining incapable. There is pain either way. The question is, which pain produces a life you can respect? And that is something nobody can answer for you. You have to decide, because eventually, comfort sends a bill. And the bill is usually paid in lost potential. You can borrow comfort from the future. But the future collects every time you choose the easy thing when the important thing is difficult. You may be borrowing from the person you will become. And that person may one day ask, why did you keep choosing this? You don't want to meet that question after 10 years. You want to answer it now. You want to look at your habits while they're still small, because habits are easier to change before they become circumstances. A little distraction is easier to correct than a destroyed attention span. A little overspending is easier to correct than crushing debt. A little procrastination is easier to correct than years of unfinished dreams. A little negative thinking is easier to correct than an identity built around helplessness. A little compromise is easier to correct than a character you no longer recognize. So don't wait for the consequences to become dramatic before you take the warning seriously. The warning is the discomfort you already feel. That feeling that something is off, that feeling that you are capable of more, that feeling that your days are passing too quickly, that feeling that you're busy but not fulfilled, that feeling that you're surrounded by noise but disconnected from yourself. Don't automatically silence that feeling. Sometimes dissatisfaction is not your enemy. Sometimes it is information. Sometimes your frustration is telling you that your current life no longer matches your values. Listen, but don't merely complain. Translate the feeling into action, because awareness without action becomes another form of entertainment. You can understand yourself endlessly and still remain unchanged. At some point, insight must become behavior, and behavior must become consistency, and consistency must become character, and character eventually shapes destiny. That's the progression. A thought becomes a decision. A decision becomes an action repeated becomes a habit repeated becomes a character trait. Character shapes the direction of a life. So be careful what you repeat, because repetition is not neutral. You are building something every day, even today. Maybe you think today is insignificant. It isn't. No single brick looks like a house, but a house is built from bricks. No single workout creates a strong body. No single page creates expertise. No single saving decision creates wealth. No single courageous conversation creates a strong relationship. But the accumulation becomes undeniable. This is why small habits matter. Not because each one is dramatic, because they compound. And negative habits compound too. That's why the 7 habits we have been talking about are not 7 isolated problems. They reinforce one another. You procrastinate. Then you feel guilty. Guilt creates negative self-talk. Negative self-talk weakens confidence. Weak confidence makes you avoid challenges. Avoidance increases distraction. Distraction reduces progress. Lack of progress increases comparison. Comparison creates discouragement. Discouragement creates more avoidance, and the cycle continues. But the opposite cycle exists. You keep one small promise. Self-trust grows. Self-trust creates confidence. Confidence makes action easier. Action creates progress. Progress creates hope. Hope makes consistency easier. Consistency creates results. Results reinforce identity. And identity influences future decisions. One cycle takes you downward, the other takes you upward. The turning point can be surprisingly small. One decision, one boundary, one disciplined morning, one honest conversation, one refusal to return to an old pattern, and sometimes that is all you have, one decision. Use it because you don't need to fix your entire life tonight. You need to stop making it worse. That is a powerful beginning. Stop the bleeding. Stop feeding the habit. Stop giving the distraction unlimited access. Stop negotiating with the same excuse. Stop defending the behavior that keeps producing the result you hate. You don't have to know every step after that. You need enough courage for the next step, and then another, and another. There will be days when you feel powerful. There will be days when you feel nothing. There will be days when you are proud of yourself. There will be days when you disappoint yourself. Don't build your identity around either feeling. Build it around returning to your principles. Because feelings change. Principles can remain. And perhaps the greatest form of personal freedom is reaching a point where your standards are no longer dependent on your mood. You do what matters because it matters. You tell the truth because it is who you are. You protect your time because your life matters. You work because your future matters. You rest because your body matters. You learn because your mind matters. You choose your environment because your character matters. You say no because your values matter. You keep your promises because your self-respect matters. And when you begin living that way, something strange happens. You become less interested in proving yourself. You become more interested in building yourself. That is a major shift. Proving yourself is external. Building yourself is internal. When you're proving, you're asking, did they notice? Do they approve? Did they like it? Did they recognize me? When you're building, you're asking, did I improve? Did I learn? Did I keep my word? Did I move forward? Did I become stronger? That shift can save you years because external validation is an unstable foundation. Today they applaud. Tomorrow they criticize. Today they notice you. Tomorrow they ignore you. If your identity depends on applause, your confidence will rise and fall with strangers. Build something deeper. And this is where I want to return to the habit of comparison. Because comparison isn't just about jealousy. Sometimes comparison is a way of avoiding responsibility. You look at someone else and say, they had better opportunities. Maybe they had more support. Maybe they started earlier. Maybe they're naturally talented. Maybe. But none of those statements answer the most important question. What am I going to do with what I have? You cannot control the starting line, but you can influence the next mile. And if you spend your entire life staring at somebody else's lane, you may crash in your own. Look forward, not because other people don't matter, because your life requires your attention. Your family needs the best version of you. Your future needs the best version of you. The people you will eventually help may need the skills you haven't developed yet. There are opportunities that can only be reached by becoming somebody capable of handling them. That's another reason to grow. Not just for yourself, for the people your future self will influence. Imagine the person you could help because you decided to learn. Imagine the family you could support because you decided to become financially responsible. Imagine the child who watches you keep your promises. Imagine the employee you encourage because you survived your own difficult season. Imagine the person who hears your story and realizes they can begin again. Your growth doesn't stop with you. Character is contagious too. Just as negativity spreads, discipline spreads, courage spreads, responsibility spreads, calm spreads, integrity spreads. When one person changes the standard, other people sometimes discover that a higher standard is possible. So don't underestimate your private transformation. You may think nobody notices. Someone will. Maybe not today. Maybe not in the way you expect. But the person you become changes the people around you. And that is why you must protect yourself from the habit of quitting whenever progress becomes invisible. Invisible progress is still progress. Roots grow underground before trees become visible. Your skill may be developing before anyone notices. Your discipline may be forming before results appear. Your confidence may be strengthening through tiny private victories. Don't confuse lack of applause with lack of growth. There are seasons when you work quietly. Those seasons matter. But there is another side. Sometimes you're not in a season of invisible growth. Sometimes you're simply avoiding the work. Be honest enough to tell the difference. That's maturity too. Don't romanticize stagnation. Don't call it waiting for the right time when you're afraid. Don't call it protecting your peace when you're avoiding an important conversation. Don't call it rest when you've been escaping for 6 months. Don't call it research when you're afraid to launch. Language can become a hiding place. You can rename a problem without solving it. So ask yourself, what am I calling this? And what is it actually? That question can break denial because denial is expensive. Reality may hurt, but reality gives you something denial cannot a place to begin. If your finances are bad, look. If your health is declining, look. If your relationship is broken, look. If your discipline is weak, look. If your attention is fragmented, look. If your dream is dying, look. Look without excuses, not to punish yourself. To understand the terrain, you cannot change what you refuse to see. And maybe that's why the first step isn't action. Maybe the first step is honesty. The courage to sit alone with yourself and say, this is where I am. Not where you pretend to be. Not where you wish you were. Where you actually are. Then ask, where do I want to be? Then, what must change between these 2 points? Now, the work becomes real, not motivational real. And real work is often less glamorous than people imagine. It is repetitive. It is inconvenient. It is sometimes lonely. It requires saying no. It requires disappointing people. It requires being misunderstood. It requires starting before you're confident. It requires continuing after the excitement disappears. But there is a quiet dignity in that. The dignity of becoming someone you respect. And maybe that is what you have been missing. Not motivation, not information, not another quote, self-respect. Because when you respect yourself, you begin treating your time differently, your body differently, your money differently, your mind differently, your relationships differently, your future differently. You stop asking, can I get away with this? And start asking, is this worthy of me? That question is powerful. Not because you're better than anyone, because you finally understand the value of your life. And your life is finite. You don't get unlimited mornings. You don't get unlimited conversations. You don't get unlimited opportunities. You don't get unlimited energy. At some point, the clock stops. Nobody knows exactly when. That's not meant to frighten you. It's meant to wake you up. Imagine being 90 years old and looking backward. Would you wish you had spent more time worrying about what people thought? Would you wish you had watched more meaningless content? Would you wish you had delayed more? Would you wish you had protected your excuses? Or would you wish you had taken more chances? Built more? Loved more? Learned more? Spoken honestly? Started sooner? Stayed disciplined? Walked away from what was destroying you? The older version of you cannot come back and change today. But the current version of you can still influence that future. That's the privilege you have right now. The future is not fully written, and that means your habits are not destiny. They are direction. Chance the direction, and eventually you change the destination. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not dramatically. But eventually, and I want you to notice something, the 7 habits aren't really about 7 behaviors. They're about one deeper question. Are your daily actions aligned with the person you say you want to become? Because you can say you want freedom while practicing dependence. You can say you want wealth while practicing impulsive spending. You can say you want confidence while practicing avoidance. You can say you want health while practicing neglect. You can say you want peace while feeding your mind constant chaos. You can say you want success while practicing inconsistency. Your behavior always votes, and eventually the votes win. So be careful what you vote for tomorrow morning, because tomorrow morning may look ordinary. But ordinary mornings repeated become extraordinary lives. Or ordinary mornings repeated become years of regret. The difference is rarely one dramatic moment. It's the pattern, and patterns can change, not all at once, but one interruption at a time. Catch yourself, notice the habit, pause, choose differently, repeat. That is how change actually happens. And there will be a moment when the old habit appears again. It will feel familiar, comfortable, almost automatic. That's when you need to remember. Familiar does not mean healthy. Easy does not mean right. Comfortable does not mean safe. And difficult does not mean wrong. Sometimes the road that feels uncomfortable is the road leading out. Sometimes boredom is the price of mastery. Sometimes loneliness is the price of leaving the wrong environment. Sometimes rejection is the price of trying. Sometimes discipline is the price of freedom. Sometimes saying no is the price of self-respect. And sometimes beginning again is the price of becoming someone new. So when the old habit whispers, don't panic. You don't need to fight your entire life at once. You simply need to refuse the next compromise. One refusal, one choice, one step, then another. Because there is a version of you that is waiting on the other side of thousands of these decisions. Not a perfect version, a stronger one, a wiser one, a calmer one, a more disciplined one, a person who doesn't need to escape every uncomfortable feeling, a person who can sit with uncertainty, a person who can fail without collapsing, a person who can succeed without becoming arrogant, a person who can say no without guilt, a person who can say yes without fear, a person who can walk alone when necessary, a person who can keep going when nobody is watching. And perhaps the most important transformation is this. You stop needing your life to feel easy before you believe your life is meaningful. You understand that difficulty is sometimes evidence that you're growing. You stop asking why the road is hard. You start asking what the road is teaching you. You stop seeing discipline as punishment. You see it as self-respect. You stop seeing sacrifice as loss. You see it as an exchange. You give up something temporary to create something lasting. You stop seeing time as something to kill. You see it as the raw material of your life. And once you see time that way, you become protective. You become selective. You realize that every hour spent carelessly cannot be recovered. You realize that attention spent on nonsense cannot simultaneously be spent building your future. You realize that habits don't merely consume time. They shape identity. And identity shapes choices. And choices shape years. And years shape a life. That's why these habits matter. Not because someone told you they're bad. Because you now understand where they can lead. And perhaps you're beginning to see something else. The goal isn't to become a person who never experiences temptation. The goal is to become a person who doesn't automatically obey it. You can have distractions around you and still focus. You can have fear and still act. You can have doubt and still continue. You can have setbacks and still rebuild. You can have comfort available and still choose growth. That is freedom, not having no temptation, having the strength to choose. And strength is built quickly, repeatedly, sometimes painfully, but it is built. So the next time you hear yourself say, it's only one day, remember that one day becomes another the next time you say, I'll start tomorrow. Remember that tomorrow is a place people have been living in for years. The next time you say, it doesn't matter, ask whether the pattern matters. The next time you say, everyone does it, ask whether everyone is living the life you want. The next time you say, I'm just not disciplined, ask whether that is a fact or a story you've practiced. The next time you say, I'm too late, ask whether being late is worse than never beginning. The next time you say, what will people think? Ask what your future self will think if you never try. Those questions can become turning points. And perhaps tonight, somewhere inside you, there is a habit you already know you need to confront. You don't need me to name it. You know, maybe it is your phone. Maybe it is your spending. Maybe it is your environment. Maybe it is your temper. Maybe it is your procrastination. Maybe it is your addiction to approval. Maybe it is your constant complaining. Maybe it is your refusal to begin. Maybe it is something you have hidden even from the people closest to you. Whatever it is, don't turn awareness into shame. Turn it into responsibility. Because shame says, something is wrong with me. Responsibility says, something must change, and I can participate in that change. Those are very different voices. Listen to the second. And if you fall tomorrow, don't use the fall as evidence that the change was fake. Return. If you fail next week, return. If you lose momentum next month, return. The person who keeps returning becomes difficult to defeat because life can knock them down, but it cannot convince them to stay down. And maybe that is the deeper lesson hiding underneath all of this. Your greatest enemy may not be failure. It may be resignation. The moment you decide, this is just who I am. This is just how my life is. People like me don't change. That opportunity is gone. It's too late. That is the moment possibility begins to shrink. But as long as you can say, I can learn, I can rebuild, I can change this pattern, I can take responsibility, I can begin again. There is movement, and movement matters, even a small movement. Because a ship changing direction by a few degrees does not look dramatic at the beginning, but hundreds of miles later, it is somewhere completely different. Your habits work the same way. A small change in your daily direction may not impress anyone today, but give it years, let it compound, and your life may become almost unrecognizable. So think carefully about the direction of your ordinary days, not your dreams, your days, because dreams don't build lives. Days do. Your dream says you want freedom. Your day asks what you did with your time. Your dream says you want strength. Your day asks what you practiced. Your dream says you want wealth. Your day asks what you did with your money. Your dream says you want peace. Your day asks what you allowed into your mind. Your dream says you want confidence. Your day asks whether you kept your word. That's the confrontation. And it is uncomfortable. But discomfort can be useful. Sometimes the most uncomfortable truth is the doorway to the most useful change. So don't run from every uncomfortable truth. Some truths are trying to save you years. And there may be a day when you look back at this period of your life and realize something. The habits didn't disappear because you suddenly became a different person. They disappeared because you stopped feeding them. You stopped rewarding them. You stopped defending them. You stopped calling them harmless. You started noticing the moment before the behavior, the impulse, the excuse, the thought. And in that tiny space, you began choosing. That space is where freedom lives, between impulse and action, between fear and decision, between thought and behavior. There is a space. Protect it. Use it, because your entire future can change inside a very small moment. A moment when you decide not to scroll. A moment when you decide to tell the truth. A moment when you decide to save the money. A moment when you decide to begin. A moment when you decide to stay. A moment when you decide to walk away. A moment when you decide that the old pattern has had enough time, and perhaps you are closer to that moment than you think. Because the person you want to become is not somewhere in the distance waiting for you. That person is being constructed by what you do next. Not someday, next, the next conversation, the next morning, the next hour, the next decision. And there is still so much you don't know about yourself. There are levels of discipline you haven't experienced, levels of courage you haven't tested, skills you haven't developed, places you haven't seen, people you haven't met, problems you haven't solved, strength you haven't needed yet. There are versions of yourself you haven't met because your current habits keep you standing at the same door. Change the habits. Open the door. And then you may discover that the person you were waiting for was never coming from outside. You were building that person all along, quickly, choice by choice, day by day. And somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the excuses, beneath the fear, beneath the years you wish you could change, there is still a part of you that knows you are capable of more. Listen to that part, not because it promises an easy life, because it asks you to live an honest one. And honesty may require you to admit that some things you call comfort are actually cages. Some things you call friendship are actually influence. Some things you call rest are actually avoidance. Some things you call planning are actually fear. Some things you call bad luck are partly repeated decisions. And some things you call just the way I am are simply habits you have practiced long enough to mistake them for identity. That distinction matters because habits can be changed. Identity can evolve. And once you understand that, you stop asking whether change is possible. You begin asking what you are willing to change. That is a harder question, but it is a better one because possibility is everywhere. The real question is commitment. What are you willing to stop? What are you willing to endure? What are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to repeat? What are you willing to become? And there may be no answer tonight. That's okay. Some questions are not meant to be answered immediately. Some questions are meant to follow you into the quiet, into tomorrow morning, into the moment when your hand reaches for the phone, into the moment when the excuse appears, into the moment when fear says, wait, into the moment when comfort says, just this once. And in that moment, you may remember that your future is not asking for perfection. It is asking for a decision. And you may discover that the smallest decision can carry a surprisingly large weight because sometimes the life you want isn't waiting for a giant breakthrough. Sometimes it is waiting for you to stop repeating the thing that has been quietly holding you back